Jacque Prager, and it is December the 4th, 2008, and we are at Jackie's home, and the address is
5200 Keller Springs Road in Dallas, Texas, and the building is called the Bonaventure. It's a condominium, and we're on the 11th floor looking out over the city.
And how do you like to be addressed? Your name?
Jackie.
Jackie, okay. Now, where were you born, Jackie?
I'm a native Texan who was born in Mount Sinai Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. And the reason for that is that my father was a traveling salesman and we had no family in Texas. And so he sent me home to where my mother's parents and family and his family were all lived in Cleveland, and that's why I was born there. And then I came back, so I just was gone for just a few minutes.
What part of the city? Do you know your address when your parents, where they lived when you were born?
In Cleveland.
Were you already in Dallas?
Oh,
Was
they
the
lived
family
in Dallas.
already in Dallas? Your parents?
I don't know where they lived when I was born. I only remember. Well, when I was a toddler, we lived in an apartment building that is really still there. I think it's just been restored. It is right off of Oak Lawn, between Oak Lawn, just east of Cedar Springs, between there and Lee Park, because I used to play in Lee Park as a toddler. And when I was, I guess, I don't know exactly how old I was when we moved, but we then moved out to Kings Road. And it was very kind of country, and we lived in a house that was owned by the Adams family. And this had been their home, cottage, and they built a brick home next door. And we lived there for quite a while. And it was really kind of country. There were horses and there were lots of animals at that time in that area. And from there, we moved, when it was time for me to go to school, we moved on to Throckmorton Street, which was also in the Oak Lawn area. And I went to Sam Houston School until I was 10. And when I was 10, my dad and his brothers bought property in what is now called Bluff View. It was on Midway Road. It was a one block of Midway Road that runs east and west, and it was in this area called Bluff View. And they built 3 houses in a row, and we had, several acres. I don't remember exactly how many, maybe like somewhere around 8 or 10 acres there. And our houses were on Midway, but the property went back to the street behind us, which was Shorecrest. Mm-hmm. And then I lived there in that house with my parents until I got married.
Mm-hmm. Would you care to give us the date and year you were born?
Oh, sure. My birth certificate says I was born in 1926.
And the month?
August 17th.
Very good.
The same day as Davy Crocker. He also was born on August 17th.
Now, were you, or your parents, were they first-generation Americans? Where were their parents?
My father was born in New York City, and my mother was born in Hungary. And she came here when she was 9 years old.
And your father's parents, where were they from?
Also that Austria-Hungary area.
Mm-hmm. Now, what were the circumstances that brought your parents to Dallas?
Well, my father was really raised in Oklahoma. And my grandfather and his brother owned called the Saloon on the River in Lexington. They lived in Lexington and the other town. It was 2 towns right together. All of a sudden I went blank.
Was that in Oklahoma?
Oklahoma,
What area? East,
Well,
west?
east, where, because it was on the river that was near Lexington. I don't know what river.
What was the large city that was near there? Was it in the Tulsa area?
No,
was
no,
in
it was
the-
south. It was southeast. It was southeast
Okay,
of Oklahoma, south of Tulsa. Yeah.
okay. And what brought them to Dallas?
Well, I think my father, I think, started working in a ready-to-wear store for somebody, even when he was very young. If I remember correctly, and I'm not sure this is true, but he said he used to work in this store when he was like 7 years old. So what he did, I don't know, but apparently he worked for whoever the people were that owned the store for a long time, and when he was, well, he went to the war, to the First World War, and I guess when he came back, he went, I guess he was still working in this industry somewhere there where they lived, either in Lexington or the other, I don't know why I can't think of the other city, but I will think of it. Anyway, and so, and my uncle was there too, and so I think he was working in the store, and Nathan Levine was a traveling man who came from Dallas and came to Oklahoma and met my dad, and they became friends. And at that time, Nathan was working for Lorch's, and so he then talked my dad into coming to Dallas. The exact years of this, I don't know, because I'm not sure if it was before or after my parents were married. Somehow or another, I don't think I was ever told that, or if I did, I just don't recall. So, at any rate, he came to Dallas, and somewhere along the way between this, he and my mother got married, and so that's what brought him to Dallas, and they were living here. And I think when they first got married, they might have lived for a short while in Shreveport. I remember something about that, but that was before I was born. It might have been right after they were married. I don't know how my dad got from there to Shreveport, unless it was just in traveling, it was easier for him at that particular moment or something.
Would you know about the year he decided to come to Dallas? Or the era?
Well, it had to be early 20s, because what I remember is when I was 4 years old, but I must have lived here as a toddler, so that was another 2 years at least before that. So that would be 24. So it must have been somewhere between 1920 and 1924.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about your Jewish education. Where does the Jewishness fit in the home life?
Well, my father, I guess there were not too many Jewish families where he lived and where he grew up. And yet he had this very strong feeling about Jewishness and Judaism and Jewish people. So I just, I went to Sunday school as soon as I was old enough. And the odd thing was, we always lived in North Dallas. We never lived in South Dallas, where everyone else was. So, as a result, and since my folks were such very good friends with Nathan and Ann Levine, and they had a daughter, Linky, who was just a little older than me. She says we've been friends ever since I was born, because she was born first. And so when they were just good friends, and we, all the time went places together, did things together, went to, White Rock Lake on the weekends together and things like that. But when I became a teenager, that was a different story, because there were very, very few Jewish kids in my schools or not in my neighborhood. There were none except my cousins, and in my school, very few. Even on all the way to high school, you could count us on two hands, I guess. Anyway, so when I became a teenager, I gained another set of parents because I had weekday parents and weekend parents, and I would be home and go to school, and then on Friday, unless I was having something at my house like a party, which we did frequently. My mother I liked having them, and she liked helping me give them. So, and everybody would come to me because they had to come mostly from South Dallas, and in fact they would come, and the girls would all stay. I had a big sleeping porch off my bedroom, and it was lined with beds, and the girls would come, and we would all sleep out on the porch. And after the boys went home, whoever's parents came to get them, because we were still not in the driving age then. But otherwise, I was delivered to South Dallas on Fridays, and I spent the weekends with the Levines, and then I'd go to Sunday school to Temple Emmanuel on Sunday, and my dad would come and pick me up after Sunday school.
What was the Jewish education like at Temple Emmanuel?
Well, in those days, I guess it was, we learned, I guess, all the basic things. I think I really remember, I knew when all the holidays were, the big ones. The little ones came and went, and I really didn't know a lot of, I guess there's only so much they could teach you on having you there on a Sunday and for those few hours. And so, I don't know, I always enjoyed going. I know I remember being editor of the Sunday school paper, and but as far as, I've learned a lot more as I've grown older, it wasn't,
What were some of the things written about in the Sunday school paper? Do you remember?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I guess things that were going to go on, or who can remember? That I don't remember.
Okay.
I wish I had copies of them,
Yeah.
but I don't.
Right. Now, what about high school? Where did you go to high school?
Well, before high school, from Sam Houston, when we moved out to Bluffview, I was 10, and I still was in grade school.
Okay.
And there were no schools out there, so I had to go to Stephen J. Hay, which was also back in the Oak Lawn area. And then, when it came to high school, I was supposedly in the North Dallas High School district because there was no other school anywhere closer to that. And yet, I was much closer to Highland Park because we were, So my parents talked to whomever, I don't know, but at any rate, I was allowed to go to junior high in Highland Park and then to Highland Park High School.
And what about college?
University of Texas. I really wanted to. I had grown up in the factory. Let's put it that way, and I liked it. My mother never had to get a babysitter because she just had to take me to the factory. I loved going there, and I would. That's not going to answer this question, but it's going to be another whole long story I'm going to tell you. But I loved going down and watching the ladies sew.
The factory, define what the factory was.
Oh, my father went in business for himself, and he manufactured ladies' clothing. Ladies' suits and dresses. And I just thought it was fascinating, I liked, even when I was younger, 5, 6, I'd go down and I would like to stand behind the ladies and watch them sew. And then I would go to the designer and I'd watch her make patterns. And then I'd go to the cutting room and I'd watch them cut. Mm-hmm. And so I learned how to do all of that just by being there. And of course, when the ladies would get up to take a break, I had already been to the cutting room and I had already had my fabrics. And I would run and sit down at their sewing machines to sew these fabrics, dying to do it myself. I was a rather adventurous kid
How old?
and very much a tomboy. How old? Oh, I guess I was 5, 6, 7, something like that. Because I got my first sewing machine, I think, when I was 8. You know. Anyway, so other than that, I was. My dad I gotta go back and my dad wanted a boy, and he only had one child. So I was both. You know, I was a boy. And I was a girl. We shot, sit out on the front porch and shoot 22s, the 22 at matchsticks out there. I had 2 older cousins in Cleveland who were boys who sent me all their toys, which were all the guns and the cars and the marbles and all the stuff. And I was pretty good at all that stuff. In fact, when we lived on Throckmorton Street, I was the only girl. All of my friends in the block were boys. And we played Cowboys and Indians, and I always had to be the Cowboys and bad men or whatever. But anyway, I was always the bad person or the Indian or whatever, because I could, even though I wasn't very big, I could run faster, I could climb over the fences faster, I could get up on the garages faster, and they couldn't catch me. So I had to always be the person they were the bad person that they were chasing, Anyway, and I had a big marble, our house there had a big, long backyard, and my dad got me sand, and I had a big sand place, a huge marble court back there. So the boys loved coming to play with all my marbles and stuff. Anyway, so Dad and I, we did things like that. I loved horses, and I rode, and because right behind us was Rendezvous Stables, just across that shore crest at the back of our property is where the stables were. So I would go when, as often as possible. I'd come home from school, and that was where I went to ride in the afternoons. And anyway, but I also liked the sewing, and I liked the paper dolls only because I always was designing clothes for them, And so, as I said, going back to the factory, I spent lots of time there and did lots of learning there. And because of the fact that I kept sewing on these fast, speeded up machines, everybody was, she's going to sew her fingers, she's going to sew her fingers. And I said, I'm not going to sew my fingers. I know what I'm doing, And I did, I had watched long enough. Anyway, so when I was 8, I guess it was about, the men drove up in the truck from the factory one day and hauled this great big factory machine up to my bedroom, which my dad had slowed down real much, and said, sew. So I did. I'd go to the factory, get fabrics, and my cousin Joyce was born when I was 11, and she was fun when she was toddling. So by the time she was 2, I was 12, 13, and it was fun. I would go fabric, and I'd lay it out on the floor, and I'd cut out stuff and make her clothes, and so that was my fun thing to do. Besides the horses and the trees, I loved climbing the trees. And if I ever wanted to get lost, or if I ever got mad and I didn't like what my mama and dad tell me I had to do, I'd go climb a tree somewhere, and they'd have to try to find me.
At one point,
I was quite, I guess, I don't think I was a problem kid. I was just a curious kid.
At one point, you had mentioned, not in this discussion, but being a model.
Well, yes, I started in the fashion business when I was 4, because my dad at that time was working for Rosh Manufacturing Company. In what capacity, I'm not quite sure, although I know he was in charge of all the models and the fashion show that they had for the markets. And in those days, those shows were held at the Dallas Country Club. And so he wanted to do something that would make their garments just stand out from all the other manufacturers. So he made dresses to fit me, and I modeled to match every one of those ladies' dresses. And so I modeled. I'd run back and forth and change my clothes and run back out to model with the next one, you know. And it's funny, there must have been, I don't know how many dozens of dresses that I modeled over those few years, but the one I remember the most my favorite was a dotted Swiss, white with little red dots. You know, I can still remember that dress just like it was yesterday, and I can't tell you anything about any of the others, but that one was my favorite. And then after that, I continued modeling. I modeled, there was a Green Brothers manufacturing company that made children's lingerie, and I modeled for them, pajamas and things, and I did not only modeling on runways, but also all their photographs for all their ads and things like that.
Would you comment on the Jewish presence in the clothing manufacturing area?
Well, I was in it for a lot of years, starting, I guess I'd say when I was 4, and all the way up to, let's see, when I got out in, 14 years ago, 15 years ago. So I didn't get out of the business until...
What about other Jewish manufacturers?
Yeah, anyway, so I was going to say, in all those years of the manufacturers, especially the early ones, they were all Jewish manufacturers with the exception of 2. There was a Donovan Galvani and there was a Maloof company. And for most of the years, until the more recent years, every other manufacturer was a Jewish family.
Who were some of the Jewish manufacturers?
Well, there was Lorch's, there was Howard Wolf, there was, trying to think of some, well, there was a lot of the jobbers like Higginbothams and all of those, but trying to think of all the others besides Lorch.
Jennifer Juniors.
Huh?
Jennifer Juniors.
Yeah, well, yeah, Jennifer Juniors. And then there was, started with a B. Bogart. Sidran. Alan, Gold. What was the name of the Gold family? I forget now the name of their line or what they called it. They were brothers.
We can come back.
There were more. I just at the moment.
Okay, that's fine.
I should have sort of made a little list or something to remind me.
But were there any? Well, some of your school experiences. Do you want to talk about some of the school experiences and having gone to Highland Park? Were there a lot of Jewish? What was the Jewish population at Highland Park?
Very small.
How was it being Jewish among that?
It was fine. You know, it was. You sort of. I guess I didn't run. I did because I didn't run socially very much with them. And I think only because I didn't live near anybody that you sort of, if it's somebody that a few blocks away or down the block or whatever, I was kind of removed being in Bluffview and they were all over there. There were, I guess, I remember mostly in high school, there were about 10 of us that they lived more in the area that I really ran around with, which were the other Jewish kids. But as far as in school, I never had any, I had a lot, friends, but when there were school events or things like that, I went, but it wasn't anybody too much that I chummed with, because I guess I didn't have the opportunity, not being in the neighborhood, and my parents not being friends with any of their parents, and I think I think at those growing up ages and into the teenage, it's the friends that you made through your parents as being younger, are the friends that you really had mostly.
You mentioned about the show in the Dallas Country Club, and yet you had many Jewish manufacturers.
They were all, as far as I know, at that time. But I really don't. I mean, I don't know if Maloof. I mean, if Maloof and Donovan Galvani were in business then. I kind of doubt it because they were still around with when I was in the manufacturing business, and which came later. And so I kind of think, I don't even know if those two were even, I doubt that those two companies were even in existence back then. But I have no idea what other manufacturers there were, because I wasn't old enough. All I knew was...
Right. About when did your father go into the manufacturing business for himself?
I think I was about, I must have been about 7 or 8, because that's when I got my sewing machine. So, yeah, and actually, going back to that, when I modeled for Lorch's, I did this for, I guess, several years when Dad was there in several markets, and so I got a reputation of being called the Prissy Missy. And some years later, I think after my dad was already gone from there, they started making children's clothes, and that's what they call the line, Prissy Missy.
Where were all of these manufacturers located? What part of the area of the city?
Down around Lamar and on Main and Elm, Pacific. I think mostly down in that area. My dad was in the wholesale merchants building in the beginning. Oh, and that's when there was another manufacturer there. Rosalie Cohen's dad also had a factory there. I can't think of the name of it, but that's when I first got to know her, because we used to run up and down the elevators together.
What was the cross street? How close was that from Sanger's?
Oh, not too far. It was because Sanger's was on Lamar, and it was like a block, just a block off of Lamar. So,
West, east, towards the triple underpass?
East. It was east of where Sanger's was. Later on, my dad had moved from there to 706 Main Street, which was on the other side of Lamar Street, between there and the courthouse. And that building was there till just a few years ago. I used to go by, and that building was still there, and it was just, I think last year or the year before, when I went by that spot, that building was finally gone. It was a little long, narrow little building. And then we moved. Then he moved out to Lamar, South Lamar, and that's when. And my factory was next door to his factory, but that was later.
And you mentioned the jobbers. Now, what was the role of the jobbers in relation to the wholesaler or the manufacturers?
Well, I think most of the jobbers, and that was, I think at that point then, in fact, Nathan Levine was also a jobber, and the Aaron brothers were jobbers, and Higginbotham, and I can. It's funny. That made them did the men's things. I can't think. I mean, you could go. I sort of, if I go up and down the streets, I could maybe there were hat milliners and stuff. There were jobbers. Goldberg's millinery, and there was another one. Another family was a milliners. Well, of course, and then there was Milliner Supply, who had been there and still there, or were there till just recently, I understand. And that was a historical company, and there were others, I'm sure. I just don't, remember all. But yeah. I hope nobody listens to this that I left out.
Now, what were about some of the Jewish holidays? What were the holidays that you celebrated?
Well, I guess we celebrated, of course, Hanukkah, and we celebrated Passover, and we didn't. Well, Purim, because we had to, get dressed up and do that. I guess those are the major ones that I remember really celebrating, those three holidays. I mean, my dad and I might have celebrated some others, but they didn't stand out. They didn't have as much to offer for kids as those three.
Was there any, what about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur?
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
Well,
Definitely we did those, but...
I have to turn my tape.
Okay, I stopped it.
You did? Okay. You were going to talk about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Oh, yeah, well, of course we did that. And in fact, of course, thinking about that, those were the long holidays with the long sitting in the temple when you were a little kid. And of course, and I did go very often, I had friends who belonged to Shereth Israel. So would go over there and be with them sometime because it was very nice. Over there you could get up and walk out when you wanted to. And in the temple you couldn't do that. You had to sit with your parents and sit until they let you go. So I thought it was kind of fun going over there because then I got to see everybody and visit with everybody, and we could get up and go outside and stuff. So
now, were Saturdays, what about Sabbath? Was there any ceremony?
Well, no.
Observance?
No, not really. We went, to temple if we went on Friday night, mostly. And, and then, of course, I went to Sunday school on Sunday, but we didn't, because we were so far, we lived so far from any of the temple or anything else. Being in North Dallas, there was no such thing in North Dallas in those days.
Now, you mentioned Purim. What happened on Purim?
Well, I got to dress up and be Queen Esther and all that sort of stuff, Now, as tomboy as I wasn't ever a Ahasuerus or anybody else. I was always Queen Esther.
Now, what about Hanukkah? Did you like candles?
Hanukkah was fun. We had Hanukkah. One of my uncles was married to a woman who was a Methodist and had never converted or anything. And so we had Hanukkah and we had Christmas. We had Hanukkah at our house. And then we went over, and then I went over there and we decorated the tree and we did all the things for Christmas, and we had Christmas morning with them. And my aunt had a sister who had two daughters who were a little bit younger than me, but we were friends. We're still friends. Both their mother and my aunt, they're all gone a long time, but the two girls we're still close, and one lives in Houston and the other one lives in Plano. But we're there. We're not related in any way, but we consider one another cousins.
Has your observance changed over the years in any way?
Yeah. Although I Well, of course, I guess through all my years of growing up and until I was married, I guess the same thing applied. Not necessarily as I became an adult, I dressed up for Purim all the time. But then when I had my children, and I have two boys, then that was different, Then then it was fun because then I could make all those costumes for them that we had to have for Purim, and they were that was fun. By that time I was in the manufacturing business and I had access to all these fabrics and everything, and so that was one of my favorite things. And if I didn't make them, my sample maker made them, so they were special for that. But we still observed, and they went to Sunday school, and they continued to, I guess, learn all that I had learned and proceeded to do what all that I had done. And I think my husband, who was from San Antonio, Barney Bedeau, I think he was raised sort of the same way I was. I mean, our observation or observing of holidays were very similar. I mean,
Had he been in the manufacturing business earlier on?
no, after we were married, when we were married, he was with Zales actually, and then he went on the road for my father, and then he was called back. He was a Marine and had been in World War II, and but he was reserve, and he had joined the reserve. That was after we were married here at Air Force Base, and he was called back during Korea, and so while he was gone, I worked for my dad, and I continued to work markets. I started. Yeah, because that's another story. I got to back up a little bit again, because when I was 11, my uncles went. The markets were held at that time in Dallas and in Fort Worth in the hotels, and so when I was 11, I was allowed to go with my uncles on the weekends when I wasn't in school and help sell on the weekends. And I got to go to Fort Worth because that's where they went. They went to Fort Worth, and my dad was over here. So I got to go to Fort Worth to help them. And it was very exciting because they had their own rooms, and I got to sleep in the showroom, you know. And I started selling when I was 11. And I was a pretty good salesperson. When I was 13, it was the summer, and I was out of school, and my dad had to go to New York on a buying trip for fabrics and things, and my two uncles were on the road, and so I was left in charge of the factory. Now, we had a bookkeeper, her name was Stella Good, who had been with them for years and was a very good friend of my Aunt Emmy's, Uncle Sid was my dad's middle brother, and Uncle George was his baby brother. There were 3 boys. They had 2 sisters too, but they lived in Cleveland. And so, of course, she was there, and she had been, with them all the time, and she ran the office and all the bookkeeping and everything. And so, but I was left in charge of the shipping department and any customers that came in or called or whatever. And so I remember the first, when they all left, and there I was in charge, I got a telephone call from one customer who wanted to know about what was in stock or this or whatever, and so I just said just a moment or whatever, and I ran to Stella and I said, Stella, there's a customer on the phone who wants to know all about what's in the stock in this. She says, well, you're the one in charge. You tell them. That was it. I became Charles in charge ever since. So I did. I took care of him, and and then the next one was easy, and the ones after that was easy, and it was fun. It was fun getting to be the boss. That's how I learned to be the boss.
About what year was that?
Well, I was 13, so it was 1939, I guess. Yeah. And I've been the boss ever since.
Now, you mentioned about getting married on the Air Force Base, a little while ago.
No, I didn't. No. I said that Barney had been a reserve attached to this reserve unit that was at the Air Force Base.
Okay.
Yeah, but then when he was actually when he was called back during Korea, he was sent to Cherry Point, North Carolina, which was an Air Force base, and he was a lieutenant, I think, at that point. But during the course of the, he was a captain. He was a captain at that point, I guess, because when but by the time we left that base, he was a major, and in fact, the I guess you'd call it the CEO, but it wasn't. That wasn't the word. But the head of that base, he was his adjutant, and he left. He retired, and so Barney was left in charge of the base until he was released after.
Now, when
his
were you
term.
married? Okay, when were you married then?
I was married in 1948
And where?
here in Dallas, in the Baker Hotel.
Were you members of the temple at that point
Yes,
in time?
and we were married by Rabbi Lefkowitz. And
Now, started to mention about, as you went along, in terms of tradition and in terms of observance and what have you said changed over the years, and how?
well, it's changed really in the last, more so for me, I guess in the last 14 years, because I worked my entire life. Because in 1953, when we came back from Barney's tour of duty during Korea, we decided to go in business for ourselves. So we started a manufacturing company, and I did all the designing and the pattern making and ran the factory, and Barney did the traveling. And we were in business for, let's see, 53 to 71. So quite a few years.
18 years.
18 years. And so I didn't belong to any organizations much, except Fashion Group, which was involved in my career. And so we just observed along the same lines that we had always observed, and and mostly was with the boys and their.
Now, you were widowed when?
In 89. And
Go ahead.
and but we closed our factory in 71. We had growing pains, and we had gone with a firm that was supposed to help us with growing pains, and they destroyed us instead. So we had to close up, and Barney was swept up right away by one of the big companies to travel and run the showroom here in Dallas.
What company?
Not Bobby Brooks. The other one.
Jarrell?
No. This was a New York company. I was thinking of
Sorry.
that. Well, I say names go first, and that's.
All right.
And at
Anyway.
any rate, I retired for a year, and I was going stir crazy because I like to play games, I like to play cards, but I was bored with the conversation. I had been in business my whole life and been around it all my life, and I just, it just wasn't. So and I had a reputation of selling refrigerators to Eskimos, so I had lots of offers by a lot of the guys in the mart to come work for me, come work markets for me, and I just hadn't decided who I wanted to go work for. So in the meantime, we had very good friends. It was a sorority sister of mine who married a man from California, and whose father had been in the maternity business, and his father had passed away, and he had run but I think for the fact that at the time their business was closed when his father passed away, and then but he had grown up in it too, like me, selling, helping his dad, and so he and another man, there was a line a maternity line of lingerie called Mary Jane. And the man who owned that company, and Monroe, his name was Monroe Weinberg, they got together at some point and I think he wanted to expand from lingerie into clothing, and knew that Monroe had all the experience, having grown up in it too. So they joined together, and they bought the company from a couple who was retiring, and it was called Corey of California, and it became the second company of Mary Jane. And so he called us, and he said, Barney, he needed a showroom. He had for the line of his dad's line, he'd had a salesman here, but he didn't want to continue with this salesman with this new line. So he wanted to get his own showroom. So we did that. And so then it was getting time that he was going to come for the showroom, and I was getting all these requests to work for somebody. So I said to Barney, I said, you know, Monroe's not going to be able to do this. Who's going to set up for him when he's going to come in? And then, you know, so I called him up and I said, we've got you the showroom and all of that. But I have been, several people have been trying to get me to come back to work in their showrooms, and I thought I'd give you first choice. So he said, oh, yes, you know. So that was another long relationship that started. He came.
Go ahead.
He came. Oh, I didn't have something to. I wouldn't bother that. Anyway, he came, and I worked for a couple of markets, and at that time, in California especially, all they made were dumb tops and bottoms. And then every once in a while he'd come with a dress or two dresses. So finally I sat him down and I said, you know, Monroe, you want to expand this line all over this country. You aren't going to do it with this. I mean, dumb tops and bottoms may be okay for California. And if you want to make dresses, you got to make dresses. You either do or you don't. One or two dresses is not a dress line. And I said, you're never going to get anywhere. I mean, this is not going to move around the country. You got to be satisfied with that idea. So he said, you don't like it? You do it. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I said, but I'm not coming to California. So we worked it out that I did all the fabric buying for all of the samples here and the duplicates, and I did all the designing here. And luckily, a friend of mine, Eileen Brynan, had just come back from California. She had been doing children's clothes and was a pattern maker. And, well, what started out that I just did the line the first time, first of all. Did the line, had all the fabric sent there, sent out my designs, the sketches, and all the dimensions for everything, and sketches, and swatches of the fabric I wanted them in. And when I went out, I would go out for like 2 weeks after the line was completed, to see about the duplicates and having everything done. And the first trip out after that, I got there and I said, this doesn't look like, I said to the sample makers, this doesn't look like my sketches, and this doesn't look like my dimensions. And they said, no, Mr. Monroe said that we had a pattern that looked just like that. So I said, no, we didn't. So I said, Monroe, you stay out of my business. Said, because what you think looks like that is not what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And so, and it just so happened then, when I got back after that, Eileen had come back to Dallas, and she had been a pattern maker, and so I said, the only way I'm going to solve my problem is to get my patterns made here. So she used her dining room table, and she made all the patterns. I'd do the designs, get the swatches, she'd make the patterns, and then I'd send everything out there, patterns and everything. That was different. And so it used to be Monroe would come in for the markets, and we'd go out somewhere, and or in the mart, and I'd introduce him. This is my boss, and he would say, "I'm not so sure who's boss."
Where were the markets held at that point in time? In what year?
Well, by that, there's a lot of in between this space. I'm sorry.
Yeah, bring us.
There's a lot that happened. Well, we were in the merchandise mart with our line, and then the apparel mart was built. And at that time, in the merchandise mart, there was associations for the Salesmen's Association, and my husband was president of the association, and so people were contracting to move into the new mart, and but they were going to lose control. They were not going to have a salesman association over there to be able to control, and they had a little control over their lives with their with their manufacturers and with the building and how they and so a lot of the guys weren't real happy with the way that things were going to change. And so he held out to the end. I mean, little by little, everybody had to go because that's where it was happening, and it was splitting the market, and it was, we found it better to move over here. Fort Worth was no longer anymore. Years before, they had stopped that with the hotels in two places, and found out that it was much better to keep it together. So we finally went at the very end.
Okay, who was it that was holding out?
Well, Barney was holding out, and the other, some of the other men who were concerned about the fact that there wasn't going to be association anymore, and that they didn't have any, control of their lives, more or less. They were at the mercy of the building from then on. Mm-hmm. And so, they held out for a long, but then we all eventually went. And
now, what percentage at that point in time, and give me an idea of the era,
okay,
were Jewish people involved in that industry?
Oh, I would say the greater percent. Now, by the time we hit the apparel mart, there were a lot of non-Jewish men becoming salesmen and women. Up until that point, there were very few. Although there were some in the merchandise mart, because one of our neighbors was Syrian, and that's how I learned how to make kibbeh. So there were some, but they were, there were a lot more. Of course, the apparel mart was bigger, and it grew faster, and more lines were developed. The whole industry grew all over the country.
What was the change as far as the local manufacturers and representatives coming in from other manufacturers in different parts of the nation?
I don't think I don't think it was a change. I mean, it was a change in that you had more competition, I guess. But there's one thing about the rag business: you go in and out of business 5 times a year. I mean, you can be the best line in the country, and if the next line is not any good, you can be at the bottom of the heap and be the worst line in the country, So you're always against that competition of other people. I mean, if you've got the right thing, it doesn't matter where you are or how many other people there are. If you've got the right thing, they're going to come to you and you're going to sell them, When I went into maternity, and I was given the territory, when I was doing the line, I was also selling here, and I was also in charge of the territory. But and that went on for, I know I'm doing that, and that went on for quite a few years because I was with them as long as I was in the manufacturing business myself. But that went on, well, I guess for a few years until I became the designer. And well, I guess it wasn't too many years, maybe 3 or 4 years by the time, And then my theory was, when I started to work for them, was that why should she look any different just because she was pregnant? And so I had been making junior dresses and sportswear, so I did the same thing again. I made the same kind of clothes I had made because most of the girls were juniors, or junior types. They were young, having babies young. And except that I just adapted them for the tummies. And nobody else had ever made coordinated sportswear, ever, in maternity. In fact, when I did the first line with all the coordinated sportswear in it, I had to go out there and I had to sit Monroe and Carol, and his wife was also in the business and traveled. She was also a salesperson. And I had to teach them how to sell coordinated sportswear because they had no idea. I mean, I changed their line completely. And it became the biggest maternity line in the country. When I go in, so I had this territory, and he said, well, get a salesman, And well, once the line was done, then I was free to be the salesperson. So I just got on the telephone, and I was one of the first telemarketers too. I started, they'd come, I'd call up and make appointments, and then I would, we'd have a line sheet. I would make sketches by all the line sheets of what this old garment looked like. And I would send those out to people who were not coming to market. And, and then if they came to market, then I'd give them a copy of that so that they could see when they got home what they had ordered. And lots of stories on this. Anyway, when I'd go into market, after this line got going a couple of years, if I had less than 200 appointments on that board, there was something wrong. And I had gotten into the point where people who couldn't come to market, I would send the sketches, and they would say, it looks good to me. Here's $2,000, $5,000, whatever it is. This is what I want to spend. You write the order. And I did a great deal of that. I never traveled. I had, and and after I was no longer doing, going back, I designed the line for quite a few years, but then my mother passed away, because it enabled me to be able to go out there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whenever I needed to. I could leave, and my mother was available because my boys were young. And my mother passed away in '74. So I just, I couldn't do it anymore. And so Monroe said, okay, then, you take over. I'm not only going to take the territory that you've been doing, which was the big territory, but I'm going to give you so-and-so's territory because he isn't doing anything and he's traveling. So I had Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi.
What year?
My mother died in '74. So it must be 75, 76. Anyway.
Is that it? Okay, we're needing to put on a second tape, I guess.
Okay.
It is December the 9th, and this is the second of our series of taping. I'm going to go back and I'm going to see if it picked up all right. Okay. And last time we were talking about,
I wasn't on there either.
the holidays. And would you tell us a little, you talked about being dressed up for Purim. Would you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I guess I was born with a little ham in me. Loved doing costumes. I guess having grown up around all the clothing and the manufacturing and the designing, that was sort of in my blood. And of course, doing costumes of any kind was fun. You know? And I'm still doing that. That comes later, but I'm still doing a lot of that. But so Purim was one of my favorites because I could, you know, have a costume. And of course, it was very advantageous that my father was in the manufacturing business, and I could go down and pick out my fabrics, and the ladies would make me my costumes. Because with school and everything else, I didn't really have time to make those costumes. Oh, so, but that was that was one of my special holidays because I liked the dressing up.
How about Hanukkah?
Well, Hanukkah was great because I not only got to celebrate Hanukkah, but I also, which we had at my house, and of course that was always good because of after all, at those young ages, the presents were very exciting, you know, to have Hanukkah, and being able to celebrate and light the candles every night and get a little gift of some sort. But and then I was very lucky, I think, because I got to experience the other side as well, because I had an aunt who was not Jewish, and we also celebrated Christmas with her. And I got to decorate the tree and that sort of thing, which, you know, I wouldn't have gotten to do otherwise. And that was exciting because I got presents again then. And in fact, I have to tell you the story. I wanted a bicycle, and I forget how old I was, but old enough to have a bicycle. And so my folks said, well, they didn't think they could get me one. You know, it was like poo, 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 they weren't going to get me a bicycle. So we're driving in the car one day, and my folks sometimes spoke in Yiddish, and especially when they didn't want me to understand what they were saying. And so we're driving in the car, and they're talking up there about whatever they were talking about, and all of a sudden I hear bicycle. Well, I thought, they're talking about a bicycle. Then I must be getting a bicycle. So Hanukkah came and went, and I didn't get a bicycle. But then Christmas came, and we're at my uncle's, and we're, you know, in their basement where they had the big den, and they had the Christmas tree and all of that, and where everybody's opening their packages and all of a sudden, here comes my uncle rolling into the room on my bicycle, which was very exciting.
Okay, you talked about being a member of Temple Emmanuel. Have you continued? Where is your affiliation? How is it changed?
Well, I was a member of Temple Emmanuel up until 20 years ago, I guess. And due to some circumstances, we left there, and my husband was ill at the time, and so we had some friends at Temple Shalom, and they had been encouraging us to come and join there because it was just a few blocks away from where we lived, and it was a long ride down to Temple. And the fact that we both worked, and it was kind of hard on Friday nights to come home from work and go all that way, and so we had more opportunity to go to Friday night services if it had been closer. So we were still talking about it after we left, but you know, Barney was ill, and unfortunately he got worse and he passed away. And so after he was gone, I had been participating in some things at Shalom with my friend, because they did some shows, and they were getting ready to do a show, and I was a dancer, which I never mentioned earlier, but I grew up as a dancer as well, because my friend Linky was a very, very, very astute dancer, and she danced in the summer musicals and all of that. So, and we took lessons together a lot of times, and so dancing was something I loved to do. And Barney was a wonderful dancer, and we danced. We did everything. We danced everything there was, and so they were doing the show, and I thought, well, I really shouldn't do this, because he had passed away in April and the show was in the fall, and I had joined the temple. But everybody said, as much as you all danced and he loved dancing, he would be happy if you were dancing. So I decided, okay, I would do that show, which I did, and it was fun. And we've been doing shows which I have been involved in ever since. But the more shows we did, the more I also became involved in the costume. And so we did several shows, and I did all the costumes. And that came about because which we haven't talked about before, but I had a connection of many years with the University of North Texas. And so I could get, and they had a large supply of costumes in their costume department. And I had access to that. So, and today I still do that. I can still go and get whatever I need from them, borrow, and so I then became not only in the shows. I'm limited. I dance, but I can't sing. I don't have any. My father, did I ever tell you about my violin playing? I did before. Okay. Well, I had no ear for music, as I guess I said before when we talked about my playing the violin. And so I can sing in the chorus when the group is singing, but you don't want to hear me sing by myself. So I would do all the dancing, and I did the costumes and skits, if there were such, which should be done. In fact, that is kind of, that's what I was doing when I re-met an old friend, Jacque Prager. And we were doing one of the shows, and our friends Rita and Marvin Rubenstein had called me and said, we want to take you out to the club Wednesday night for dinner, and we're going to ask Jacque Prager to go along with us. And I said, oh, how nice. I have not seen him in 40 years, since college, really. And so I said, but I can't go this Wednesday because we're in the last week before the show, and we're rehearsing every night. So I'd have to wait. I could go a week later because the show is coming up this next weekend, but I can't go this week. So we made the date for a week later. But then I get a call from Mort who says, you mean you can't go out any night to dinner? I said, no, because we rehearse every night. And I said, well, maybe Sunday night. I have 2 rehearsals. My skit rehearsal is at 6, but my dance rehearsal is not until 9. And the skit is very short, so I might be through fast enough that I can, run out. So he said, okay, I'll be watching a game, and you call me when you get through with the skit. Well, watching a game is something he really did and still does do. But anyway, so I did call, and we went out and had a little quick dinner not too far so I could get back to Temple for sure by 9. And sort of reminisced about the old times and what's happened to our lives in between. And that was our first date. And Mort tells the story now. We did have a date when we were in college. One date, he said. And this was our second date, which was 45 years later. Anyway, that. As I say, that's the show thing, and the my connection with acting and the show business and the costuming and which is still, you know, that is something I like to do now, because since I don't do the designing anymore, I don't manufacture anymore, and I don't draw pictures for paper dolls anymore as I did as a little kid. It gives me that outlet that I love doing.
Are you still active in Temple Shalom?
Oh yes.
How?
Oh yes. I am very active in Temple Shalom. I have been ever since I joined practically. But I have been president of the sisterhood. At one point, I held a lot of other offices too, but I've been president of the sisterhood, and I have been 4 years ago. 5-6 years ago, I had been working in our gift shop, and we wanted to redecorate it, and I was made manager of the gift shop, which was a great opportunity because I'm also a frustrated architect. I did a lot. I did the plans for our home that we lived in for 30 some odd years. I decorated several showrooms during the period of the long period of my time in business, and I did. We just in our home where we are now, in the high-rise condo, we gutted it, and I did the plans for that. So I redid the shop, and we opened our new shop, and I was manager for 2 years, and that's our period of that you can be. And so then for 2 years, I worked a lot in the shop, did things, but I wasn't the manager.
When did you join Temple Shalom?
I joined in 89. Barney died in April of 89, and I joined in the fall, right? In the fall. And anyway, so I'm back again now managing the gift shop, which is good because I like the selling and I like the...
Has the congregation changed over the years? Have the services changed in any way? Do you see any changes in the way they do things?
Well, yes, of course now we have Cantor, who is a great cantor. And in fact, this past Sunday night, we had a great festive event celebrating his bar mitzvah year at Temple Shalom. And it was a roast and toast, and it was fun. And also, yes, I've seen changes in that we do a lot more Hebrew in our singing and in our prayers. And I don't read Hebrew, but thank the Lord for transliteration because it enables me to keep up. And of course, there's been changes because of the change in rabbis since I've been there.
Do you see more talit in
absolutely.
And kippot?
Yes, lots of kippot, and some talit. Not everyone, but I know more. Wears his talit when it is appropriate. But not everyone. But kippots, yes, lots, and we sell lots of those in the shop too. We have a very great shop. It's the best shop in the city, and I think we have the reputation for being the best shop in the city.
Now let's talk about Jewish organizations. I'm sorry.
And it's called Traditions. I just must get that in.
Very good. What about the Jewish organizations over the years that you've been affiliated with?
Well, I really have not been very much because working, I always belonged to the sisterhood, and I always belonged, no, I guess that's the only thing I really belong to, because I'm a person who, whatever I belong to, I am active in. And with working and small children and um, and flying, because I am a pilot or was a pilot. I just didn't have time for organizations unrelated to what I was doing. But I have been very active in the fashion group. When I first joined it, it was called Fashion Arts. And it was a group of women all in the fashion business. And we were very active in promoting our business, and we started in 1962. We had the opportunity to start a museum. In having Lawrence Marcus on one of our boards and working with him, and the idea of a museum, because we had been given the cotton collection. Every year there was an award of cotton collection. And this had been given to us, and that was the start of our museum. And because we worked with Lawrence, he said that they had all of Carrie Marcus Neiman's clothes in a warehouse out on somewhere. I can't think of the name of the street, but anyway, they had in a warehouse, and that they would give us all of those clothes as a basis also for our museum. It was great. And so in 1962, I was president of Fashion Arts at the time, and in 1962 we had a gala event, a fundraiser at the Merchandise Mart, and Lawrence and I guess, announced the start of this museum and what was in it. And it was very exciting. And I remember all the years as we were growing, all of our members, how whenever we would, of course, we put out feelers for clothes, and there were many women who had marvelous couture clothes and would give them to us. And I remember we'd get together and we'd sit among the clothes and repair, sew, you know. And the apparel mart gave us space. We would say they gave us space, and fortunately they gave us space on the first floor. And so it was very good, because at that time during this period we had moved from the Merchandise Mart into the apparel mart. And as our museum became big enough to really be a museum, then they gave us this space on the first floor just to house it, and we built cabinets to hold it, and we would have, sometimes we could use some of the garments in shows. Some were too fragile. This is still the case over the years. I think there's a group of them that are set aside at this point that can be used to be modeled, but most of the things are too precious and too delicate. And that was a long growth, because when business became really, really busy, thank God, in our industry, the apparel mart was the space was in demand, so they had to take us away from the first floor, and they gave us some space upstairs on one of the upper floors, which was okay, and we were growing there, but we had no opportunity. We could do a little showing in windows downstairs in the lobby area, but it really wasn't satisfactory, and we needed bigger space, and then it came to the time that they needed that space as well. So we went out looking for a place, and we talked to the museums in the city, and they were not interested in fashion. So at the same time, I was educated, in the meantime, this fashion group, there was a national, we were local, but there was a national organization called Fashion Group. We were Fashion Arts, and this fashion group was an international organization, I should say. And they heard about us, and they wanted us to join them. But they had restrictions. You had to be in management. And we had a lot of models in our group. And so we said, we will only join and become fashion group if you take all of our models. And which of course they did, which has been great because we have some wonderful women that were in that capacity, and one being Kim Dawson. So now we were fashion group. Well, one of the things, and I became education, I had been treasurer and a couple of other things, but I became education chairman for that, at a time in which we were having a problem with students coming out of our universities in the state to try to go to work in our industry, and they were not trainable, they were only teachable, because they were being taught from a book. None of the professors or the teachers that they had in any of these schools that professed to have a fashion department had ever been in the business. So our thought was, and we went around to the different ones and talking about them, that we needed to be able to either teach the teachers or teach the students in, having special courses or visiting professors or however they wanted to handle it. But we were just unable to use most of the students that came from these schools. And at the same time, we were having to move the museum. And also at the same time, among the schools was the University of North Texas. They had a new head of the art department come in, an Ed Mathill. And so I went to him and I was telling him of the situation with the museum and also with the school, because it fell under him. And he was very gung-ho about having both. So Lois Watson, who was an alumni of North Texas, Kim Dawson, Ed Mathill, and myself went to the president of the university, who at that time was Jitter Nolan, who I had gone to school with at the University of Texas. He had been a cheerleader there, and I had been very active in student government, so I had known him very well. And we told him what we wanted to do, and Ed told him what he wanted to do, and Jitter said, that's fine. He said, but Jackie, it's going to take you 10 years to get this going. And I said, because we have no money, and Fashion Group was going to do all the benefits and all to raise the money, which we did for 10 years. We supported this.
Did Kim Dawson already have a modeling agency at that point in time?
Oh, yeah. Yes, it was well known, right. And so I said, oh, no, Jitter, the fashion industry works much faster than that. He says, yes, but academia doesn't. And he was right, because it was 10 years later that Ed Mathill and I went to Austin, to the legislature, to get the first money that was allocated for this department and this museum. And in the meantime, we had wonderful benefits. We raised lots of money. The museum grew. It grew on them. It grew on a campus. It got a building. part of the building. After a while, we even had a curator, and it's still there. It has now moved again into a building, another building, and it is awesome. I go in there, and it's like I get goose pimples because it's a marvelous, huge, like a warehouse room, climatized to save all the clothes, double stacks of all these wonderful clothes going back way into the 1800s. And we have a collection, a special collection, which was given to us. We had a friend, a woman who was born in Texas and lived in France. I'm sure it's France. Claudia, isn't that awful? I can't think of her last name except, that's bad, because I know. But she was married to a count or someone, and she had wonderful clothes. I mean, wore the most expensive couture clothes and fabulous things, and she would every year give us her clothes because she was in a world of where you don't wear the same thing again the next year. And so this collection became vast. In fact, we had there was a showing just of her things at SMU at the Meadows a couple of years ago. We did a show. We now have a curator, Myra Walker, who is fabulous, and we not only have such a wonderful collection, but we exchange with the Metropolitan because they borrow from us sometimes for shows. And at one point, their curator passed away, and he had been a friend of Myra's, and the university gave her leave because they asked for her to come until they could find a new curator to come up there for a year, which she did. And I was up in New York at one of the shows, and she did a fabulous show.
Were there any Jewish youth organizations that you were involved with as you grew up and growing up?
No, because we didn't really have a lot of that. I mean, there wasn't that much AZA and that. We didn't have all that at that time. Anyway, being involved with this museum has been exciting, and we've even, I have to say that we have an even more exciting excitement about it, because 1900 Main is where we now have a show, a display room at this point. But the University of North Texas has bought the old Tychus building, and it is going to be renovated, and we are going to have the part that's the windows that go from Main to Elm all the way around. That's our section. And hopefully as soon as they raise all the funds they need to do all this. And then we hope to be on the 5th floor, which will then be climatized again for the garments, to move the entire museum into that building. So it will be housed here and will be able to be used by designers and a great place for people. I mean, a historical addition to our city.
What is the cross street from 1900 Main? What is the close building? Is that close to Tychus now? Or
It is Tychus.
It is Tychus.
It is
That is
Tychus.
the address
You know,
for it?
the Elm Street side, they made condominiums or something. But the Main Street side of that building I've been as far as up as the 5th floor. It's nothing. It's vacant.
Okay.
See, and there has been a school there, though. There has been a community school is in the building right now. I'm not sure what all the schools that use it, but there maybe the.
We have to turn.
Well, I would like to do this.
Okay, continue, please.
Well, I guess that's the most exciting thing to this date is the fact that, and they have as I said, North Texas is now having a campaign for funds to raise the money to complete the plans for this building. And in the meantime, I was doing small shows in this area, which is the lobby of the school right now. And I think it's on a couple of 3 floors is this school, and I think it's used by the community colleges or. Well, no, El Centro has its own building, but no, these are.
Have you been
other
involved?
courses. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Have you been involved in any other cultural or secular groups through the years that you haven't mentioned? And what were their activities?
Well,
Were you involved in B'nai B'rith in any way?
no, I belong to some of the others now that I've retired, and I didn't belong to anything. I was working between what I was doing with North Texas, and I used to tell Al Hurley, the president of the university, who came there after Jitter left, and Ed Mattil had said, we're going out to dinner one night because you have to tell Al and bring him up to date to where we are and what we're doing and get him on board. So we did this. And so between, I served on a board that was formed for the college because, of course, all of this made the education part, the design department, just flourish. They students came and it was a great department, and we did. A lot of the kids came to our manufacturers and to get to work. Apprenticing, and it was a great combination, and it helped the school grow, and it helped all of us get students, and many of our women designers and retailers and whatever that belonged to fashion group did those courses up there for them to help. And so it was really between my own business and my involvement there. As I said, I used to tell Al Hurley I was orange and white on one side and green and white on the other side, because my loyalties were in 2 places.
Which were?
The University of Texas in Austin and the University of North Texas in Denton.
What about your family structure over the years? Were you the only child, and did your grandparents ever live with you? Aunts and uncles in the extended family?
Yes, I'm an only child. I was an only child. My father, I think I mentioned this once before, my father wanted a boy, and he only got a girl who had to be the boy and the girl, and I was, gladly, because I liked doing all those things that boys did, as well as the girl things. And I had, my father and his brothers bought property on Midway Road. There's a block of Midway Road that runs east and west in Dallas. And the rest of it is all north and south. And they bought this land there. I think I mentioned this before. Yes. And so we all lived together, which was great. And I had cousins. It was my dad and mother and myself in one house. The next house was my Uncle Sid and my Aunt Emmy, who was the one who had the Christmas trees. And then my Uncle George was in the next house, and my Aunt Phyllis. And they had two children, Joyce and Joel, who are, I call them my little sister and brother, because living so close, it was like, and they were younger, of course, than I, so it was like if you didn't like what was for dinner at your house, you just shopped around at one of the other houses till you found what you wanted to eat. They did it, and I did it, and it was fun. But also, when they first built there, behind my Uncle George's house, they built a small little bungalow for their parents, my grandparents, my dad's mother and father. And they moved here and they had been living in Cleveland because the three boys had two sisters, both who lived in Cleveland. And my grandparents had lived there with them. And but when they bought all the property and built the house, they wanted them to come here, which they did. And they stayed for a while. And then, I don't know why they went back to Cleveland. I was at an age where that just wasn't something if I heard about the reason why or whatever, it didn't sink in. I just knew that they went. It was nice while they were here. And then, of course, we went to Cleveland every summer anyway, because my father wanted me to. My father was very, very, very family-oriented. And he kept in touch with all sorts of relatives. In fact, he had a cousin who was in the war. Also, my dad was in the war. And he came out with, I guess, shell shock or something. And he was in a home in New York City. And he had a daughter. But his wife had died, and because of his condition, he wasn't able to take care of her. So she was put in a convent, and she became a nun. And so my dad kept in touch with her. And so when he and I would go to New York on business to buy fabrics, because, well, when Barney, I got to go back a little bit. When Barney...
Time frame.
Yeah.
What time frame? 40s, 30s?
Well, it's 50s.
50s. Okay.
We're in the 50s. This was in the 50s with Korea, when Barney was called back in service. When we came back home in 53, we went in business for ourselves. That's when we started our company, which was called Bedell Manufacturing Company, and the label was called Jacque of Dallas. And so then my dad and the brothers were still in their business, and we were next door to them. We had a building next door to them on South Lamar. And so when it came time for buying fabrics and that sort of thing, my dad and I went to New York together. And one of our trips, go back to the cousin. So she would come, to be with us in the showroom, and she was a fun lady. And of course, in those days, she had to have an escort, and a young woman, a young girl from the convent would bring her to us, and she would stay with us for the day, and in the showroom, and she was so much fun. customers would come in and she'd get up and she'd volunteer. This is the latest in fashion. Of course, she was in her whole regalia in those days. They still wore them all the time. And we kept in touch with her through the years. And some years later, and of course, every time I went up, I would see her, and I kept in touch. And some years that she always wanted to come to Texas. So some years later, Barney and I sent her a ticket to come to Dallas and visit us. And she really, I think, had a great time. She came, I think it was after my dad and mother had passed away. They were no longer living in my memory. I think that's true. And we had friends across the street from us where we lived on Briar Cove that were Catholic. And so she would go to Mass with them every morning and in the evenings. And then we took her up to the lake with us on the boat. In fact, she fell in at one point. And, but she said it was one of the best times she'd had in her life, visiting with us. And we just had a really good time with her. And I was so glad that we had been able to do that, because she later took ill and passed away.
You mentioned you had been a pilot as well. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, when we came back from the service, Barney had we had some friend in San Antonio who had a plane. His best friend, who was like a brother. And he had been up in his plane and other planes, and he had always had the bug, to learn to pilot, but never had the opportunity. And so when we came back and went into our business, he decided, and after he had been attached to the Air Force and had been, flying with some of the guys there, he decided he really wanted to learn to fly. And I'm a person who, if you can do it, I can do it, and I'll try to do it better. So we started taking lessons, and we did. I soloed in 7 hours, which was very rare for a woman, and loved flying. It was my escape. It was, we traveled, every weekend we would go. And even when the kids, the baby were little, I have in my log book, changing diapers at 8,000 feet or something. We would put the baby in the back seat and in the back, and we would take turns piloting, and then one would be the navigator, one would be the pilot, and we did a lot of traveling that way in our plane. We'd go to Cleveland and we'd go, the coast.
You mentioned
flying. We would. Barney was head of the fashion organization, the salesman's. He was president of the salesman's organization, and so they had their meetings once a year, like in Florida, and we would fly there, and sometimes in California. So we flew around the country and we went to Cleveland and Chicago to visit, family and so forth. And but we had a saying: there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. So if the weather was not just so, and we did not fly instrument. We had some lessons, but we chose not to fly in the bad weather. We would get stuck places, we would, and not be able to go when we had planned to go. So one of my stories about that is that when our son Harry was like 4 years old, we were going to San Antonio, to fly to San Antonio, where the family was, where Barney's family lived, for the Christmas holidays. And we went, and the weather was bad, and we chose not to try to make the flight. So we had to go in the car. Now this child was now, I guess, 5 years old maybe, and he'd been flying since I was changing those diapers at 8,000 feet. And so we're driving in the car, and he's lying down with his head in my lap and his feet in Barney's lap. And he comes up, he says, I need to ask a question. How, he's waiting, see, because we were about to Waxahachie, I guess, by this time. How are we going to get to San Antonio if we don't go in the sky? So we decided that we had missed something in his education. He thought he'd only flown out of town. He didn't know the roads went from city to city. He only knew that you flew from city to city. Anyway, so that was one of the examples. We once stayed 4 days extra in Tampa, Florida, because we went down for gas, and weather was between here and there, and we just stayed there. And we had shipped our clothes, because we had been to this convention, we had shipped our clothes, most of them, back by FedEx or something. And so we did, and it was, we were going to winter, because this was over the Christmas holidays. And so we were going to winter, so we sent the summer clothes we had used in Florida back, in the suitcases or trunk or whatever it was we sent. And we had nothing but heavy clothes, so we had to go to Target or wherever we went, or Walmart, whoever it was, and buy some summer clothes so that we could survive for the 4 days. But
now, was your mother also involved in the manufacturing business?
No.
What did she do?
my mother was a wonderful housewife and cook and mother and chauffeur and all the things that mothers usually do. She also liked to play golf. She did that. My mother did not sew. Maybe buttons, but my mother did not sew. And she didn't need to sew, because once I was 5 or 6 or 7, I was sewing, and so she didn't ever need to sew. Or also that she had the factory where people, sewed for her. But, and she belonged to organizations. She did that. And I don't remember which ones altogether, but I know she did several. And she played, cards and golf, as I said. And in fact, she cooked so much. She was a really good cook and made wonderful soups. And of course, I never had much time to do that. Well, she kept us in soup. She'd make soup for her, she'd make soup for us. So she'd bring me soup. At one point in time, I had to say, Mother, my freezer is so full of soup, I can't put anything else in it. Don't make any more soup right now. She was so afraid we wouldn't have soup, and as a result, I never learned how to make soup. I could make chicken soup, but that's about the extent of it.
What about intermarriages? You mentioned that your uncle had married a woman that was not Jewish.
Yes.
And what was their home like as far as their religiosity?
Their home
orientation?
was, I guess, like ours, not much different. My aunt was a Methodist, and she did go to church. And she had a sister whose husband died at a real young age, and she had 2 girls. And they came to live with my aunt and uncle. And of course, they're all gone, but the 2 girls and I are still very close. I consider them cousins, even though we have no relationship. And one lives in Rockwall, Plano now, in Dallas. And the other one lives in Houston, and the older one. And she and I guess, have been closer than the younger one and I. And she is very Jewish-minded, I guess. She's sort of been the Jewish side of their family. A lot of her friends are, and she, although, you know, they don't observe the holidays or anything like that, but she's very involved with the Jewish community and friends and things like that. And whenever I go there, with all my sorority sisters get together to have lunch or something, you know, we have like reunions, and she comes, you know, and so she knows all of them. And they were very fortunate when they lived in Houston all these years, and about a year and a half or 2 years ago, they moved to Galveston, and they bought one of the historical houses, which they lived in, and then they have a beach house. And she's always saying, come down and visit us, and you all can stay in the beach house and all that. Well, when the catastrophe hit Galveston, they came, first went to Houston with some friends, and then they came here to the sisters when the Houston situation got bad. And they were so fortunate that she said she was sure they were going to lose the beach house. But they happened to be, I guess, around the corner of where the wind came or something, because neither their home nor the beach house was destroyed, or, you know. So they were very fortunate, and with that, and I was happy for that, for them, you know, because they're a great couple, and we're very close. I'm very close, talking about family, I'm very close with all my cousins. I have, because my father took us to Cleveland every summer, I got to know all my first, second, third, fourth, fifth cousins. You know, there were lots of them in Cleveland. I don't know if I told you this before, but at one point, I was there for the 4th of July, and my first cousin's older daughter and I went to all the other side. They're on my father's side. Actually, they're all the same, because my mother and father were very distant cousins. And so my father's mother's maiden name was Baumel, and my mother's maiden name was Baumel. So you can see there was a large connection there that went way back. Anyway, so we went to all the parties. There was one family, the branch of the family, the Goulders, and they had 6 kids, and they had a big 4th of July thing. At one of them owned like a little ranch kind of thing outside of Cleveland, and every year they'd have these big parties, 4th of July, and so we went to that particular affair. And when we got back, she said, do you know, I kept track. We saw 100 cousins today. We probably did. There were that many.
Were there any other intermarriages in the family, and how did that work?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Not that I know of. At any rate, it was not. It was sort of not an issue with us. It's. I just, that's why all of this. I don't have problems with any of this. I never really had problems at school. I never really felt that I was discriminated. Even when in high school, when my father would not let me date anybody that wasn't Jewish. He was very strict about that. And as a result, I never really ran with any of the other kids in the school. But, and actually, the women especially, they had their little groups. They knew one another from churches and whatever else. But after some years ago, they started a Lassie's alum group here in Dallas, and I got a call from one of the girls to come, and I went to very often. I haven't in the last few years because I have something else that I do on the day they meet, but when I came back the first time, you would have thought I was a long lost buddy. They were all so happy that I had come, and it was interesting that since, there were only maybe 10 of us in Highland Park High School when I was there.
How about describing the Jewish community through the years from when you were very young, and give us some time frames? How would you describe the Dallas Jewish community in your situation or from your standpoint, having been here some years?
In what way are you talking about?
As to where people are socially and how they interact. What about the difference of the kids that were going to temple as opposed to the kids at Cherith Israel, or the kids at Tifereth, or Hebrew education with the Hebrew school, Jewish education wise?
Well, of course,
what are your observations?
I was kind of on the outside looking in, and so to speak, because I lived in North Dallas, and my visits to the Jewish community in South Dallas were, as I said before, weekends and holidays. So that's the only, although, I often, because I was in Highland Park schools, sometimes my holidays were slightly different and I remember being out of school and going to Forest High, for instance, with someone, when they were still in classes, and I would go visit, and of course, most of the Jewish population's children were in Forest High School, except for those of us, few, that were out in the boonies. But I don't know, I guess because of that, my experience was mostly social, I would say. And of course, we had temple dances, which was the big gathering. We didn't have any places in those days where kids, clubs or whatever. So the temple dances were the big gathering, and not only the Reformed kids came, but all the other kids came too. It was the highlight of the social events. And I'm sure that I don't remember much going to country club. We didn't ever belong to a country club. I still have never belonged to a country club. We would go and somebody would invite us, but it's a funny thing. I had never experienced any, and maybe it's because the kids I knew, but I knew a lot of kids whose parents belonged to country clubs, and yet I never, it sort of never entered into any thought. I don't know. I just never had I have never been a person who had any kind of a feeling that I was discriminated against in my school because I was Jewish. I never felt anti-Semitism. I am very fortunate. I know lots have. It never has crossed my life. I know it has affected, perhaps. It was interesting. The only time that it affected my life, I must admit, was when I ran for sweetheart at the University of Texas. And I was very popular on the campus. I had done a lot of things. And at that point, I ran for sweetheart. And a Jewish girl has never been sweetheart at the university. And it didn't bother me. I didn't think that, it did not I didn't think, oh, well, you'll never make it, don't do it. I did it because I had so many friends on the campus. And you would vote, and then there were like the Big Ten, okay? I found out afterwards that I missed the Big Ten by 3 or 4 votes. And I also found out that the president of Sammy's, who was Annette Strauss's husband. Now, I think you put the Ted Strauss. You put the bad things out of your mind. Ted Strauss told the fraternity, made the fraternity boys, whatever his threat was, they were not allowed to vote for me. And so I missed Big Ten by that. And that's the only time I have ever in my life
Now, did he tell the Sammys they were not allowed to, or was someone telling him to say that?
No, he was president of the Sammys, and because his girlfriend, Annette wasn't running for that, but because she was an A Phi, and and I guess I was a D Phi E, and he didn't want, it was like that's the only discrimination I've ever felt.
I'm out of tape, but we're still on. Okay, so I see you brought some scrapbooks, and we'd like very much for you to show us your scrapbooks.
Okay.
So let's bring these over.
Did she put the new film in? No, no.
We're at the scrapbooks. I'm out of tape.
I'm gonna take my cup and run to the right.
Delighted that you've got your scrapbooks with you, and if you'll hold that up and then you can describe some of the things.
This was my life at the University of Texas. I had fabulous college years, and of course our famed tower. And then as a freshman, I had joined a sorority, the Delta Phi Epsilon, and they had put me up for this race it was a varsity, they had a carnival every year, and it was called Varsity Carnival, and I was put up for Varsity Carnival Queen. And we each had a booth, and our booth was the Gay Garter Girls, of which I was
Wait a minute,
one.
let me get myself.
There's something, why do you have to do that?
Okay, go ahead. You're talking about the Gay Garter.
This is the Gay Garter Girls, and that was our booth. And what they did was they bought a ticket, and then the girls would put their legs up, and they had to throw the garters onto the legs. And that's me right there.
Wait a minute. Go ahead. Now, show us you again.
What?
Where are you? Again, please.
Where am I?
Yeah, again.
Oh, every year the university had a carnival called...
Are you in front?
Yes, oh, I'm right here.
Okay.
Right there.
That's fine.
Okay.
Let me tell you the problem. We're getting... Show us.
Would it be best, just a second.
Just go ahead.
No, don't take it right now. If you don't have to have me in it.
No. I'm getting a picture. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Do you want me to do this again?
No, go ahead. You are. Go ahead.
Oh, which one I am? Is that what you want?
Yes.
Okay. This was our booth. It was called the Gay Garter Girls, And what the girls would do would stick their legs up in the air and they threw garters at it. And this is me right here in the front.
Okay, let's go to the next.
Named Sweetheart nominees, because this was still during the war, and there were many soldiers in the camps around. And so this, I was among the ones who were nominated. It was the 2nd Infantry of at Camp Swift, and this was in April of 1944. After that, also every year at the university in the spring, they had the 10 most beautiful girls were nominated by a movie star, and you sent pictures. Pictures were sent, and I guess little bios about the people. And so Tyrone Power picked the 10 most beautiful girls at the University of Texas. There were approximately 250 entries to this, and we were the 10, and this one is me. Also, in the May of that year, Theta Sigma Phi presented the 8th annual Time Staggers On, which was a show that was put on. And of course, I loved being in shows and doing that sort of thing. And so this was the program from the show. And this was a show, and the pictures that we saw before was taken of us because during the course of this show, the 10 most beautiful girls were all on the stage and were identified. The next thing that happened to me was a speech or elocution from a lady named Mrs. Woodrow, and there was a young man, a boy, who also took from her. His name was Tommy Vandergriff, and he and I were the same age, and we were put together in all of the special recitals, I guess you'd call them, that Mrs. Woodrow had for us. And somewhere along the way, someone sent my photograph to Warner Brothers. And I got this letter from them wanting me to come to possibly take a screen test to come to California. And I guess it was after the 10 Most Beautiful thing, and through Mrs. Woodrow, that I had this, somehow she was involved, so I had this acting experience.
I knew Tammy.
What was this? Oh, this was a letter from the student publications. You have been selected as a Bluebonnet Bell nominee for the 1945 Cactus. And because I like performing. And so we had a show coming up. We did Hedda Gabler. And then
Yeah.
and I'm not sure who. Then decided to do a show, and they called it Steppin' High. And this was the group of people that were in the show, this was obviously at one of the rehearsals or the dress rehearsal or after the show or whatever, but that's me right there next to that cute little sailor. And there's my friend Linky, who we've talked about in the past, and many other close friends from Dallas were in the show. Ducky Fernberg, she was Ducky Yaron at that point, and Rollo Herman, and Buddy Rosen, and there are others here, but I can't do all of them. I can't decide who all of them are. So that was from that show, which was great. And it said, "Steppin' high makes the GIs glad he came to Texas." And that blonde, there's a little quirk in here in this article, says, "That blonde on the front line makes me glad I came to Texas," exclaimed one Yankee soldier. And I think I was the only blonde, so that had to be me. And this was our dance. We were dancers, and this was the group of dancers, and that is me on that end. I was always on the end of the dancers, even when I was a little girl, or any other lineup of people that you would see, because I was always the shortest, the smallest, so I always got on the end. Oh, and here's another of our numbers.
Hold it.
And see, I'm on the end again. As you notice, I'm the smallest one down here. And that's my friend Linky again, who was really a good dancer also.
Okay.
This was just the program, Steppin' High, and everybody autographed it. It has lots of nice words. As a sweetheart of Phi Delta Epsilon to represent our fraternity at the Army-Navy dance here to be held on February the 24th. And this came from Galveston, Texas. This was the fraternity at the medical school. This was February. It doesn't say what year, but it had to be 40, probably 44. Oh, it's 45. February 45. There it is. Okay, and this was the fraternity at the medical school in Galveston. That Army-Navy dance was given by medical students, and Sweetheart was to be named, and these were the 6 girls who ran, and this one is me. I always seem to be running for something. Brings the Sweethearts out. That was running for Sweetheart. 11 entered the race for the 1945 Sweetheart of the University of Texas, and it was the same number filed in last year's contest, and I was one of those. And this is also
About 30 minutes.
These are the 11 girls who ran, and this one, of course, is me.
Okay.
Bunch of really pretty girls and great girls. In the interim, I was tapped for Orange Jackets. Orange Jacket was an honorary association of women on the campus who were very active on the campus, and it was a very big honor to become an Orange Jacket. And Dallas girls, there were several of us from Dallas who were picked. And that was very special to be an orange jacket. Are among the 8 bluebonnet bells pictured in the 1945 cactus. 8 girls were chosen to be bluebonnet bells. These 8, and the 4 of us were from Dallas. And Ann Barnes and I went to Highland Park together. We were friends. So, to me, it said, "Dear students, on the recommendation of Mr. Clayton Blakeway, President of the Student Association, I am appointing you as student representative on the Campus Financial Drives Committee, of which the College of Business Administration is chairman." The head of that was the chairman. "I hope very much that you will be willing to serve on this committee." That was a nice honor. Then I ran for assemblywoman for the university student body Congress, I guess you'd call it, student government, there were 9 entered the assembly races, and I was the only girl in this group.
Hold it.
Huh?
Have you, oh, all right. No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. This was another thing. This was the Camp Swift paper. 4 Texas co-eds enter the race for 2nd Division's football queen. I don't know how I got nominated to this, but there I was. And men will to decide which girl is to wear the crown. And these are the 4 of us, queens in waiting. These were the other 4 girls. And these people were elected from the different schools. Oh, there's more here, wait. And I was elected from the business school. There were 2 of us elected from the business school, Wayne Price and myself, these 2.
Okay.
On the election. In the meantime, going back to Camp Swift, it seems that I won and became the queen of the Camp Swift. And so this is nice. The caption under my picture was, "A pretty girl is like a melody," and I thought that was very nice. This was exciting to be picked for that. Oh, I'm missing a picture that must have fallen out, but this was the gown I wore, and I was getting, this was there. The gala dance was here tonight to crown the gridiron queen. And that was my crown, which was roses. And unfortunately, we seem to have lost a picture somewhere. Probably used it for something.
Okay, now.
Paper announcing the new presidents of the sororities and fraternities. And I was then elected president of Delta Phi Epsilon, my sorority. This was, and they have Roundup in the spring, and they have a parade, and this was a parade of the Orange Jackets were riding in the car, you know, in the parade, and that's me, right there. university, they had, say, selected the 10 most beautiful girls on the campus. And this particular year, Zachary Scott was the one who did the picking, and I was one of the 10. This was a telegram that came to me announcing, congratulations, Zachary Scott selected you one of the Big 10 to be here for pictures Monday morning. So that was that. Okay. And these were the 10 most beautiful girls at that particular year. And as you notice, I am on the end because I am, again, always the shortest. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
Staggers On, which is a show, and the 10 most beautiful girls were being presented at, this, oh, I did do it. This was the second time I was the 10 most beautiful girls. We did one before. And this is against Time Staggers On, and this one was my costume and picture for this particular one. I did two years in a row. At Times, this was on the front page of the Dallas Morning News. On October 1st, no, wait. Oh, no, on April 11th, no, that's not the date. It wasn't 1885, that's for sure. I'm not sure what the date of this one was, but April 1946. And it was an article on the front page announcing the 10 most beautiful, that I was one, from Dallas. Okay, this was a letter from the Board of Directors of the University of Texas Veterans Memorial Scholarship Fund has selected you as a member of the steering committee, which is being composed of campus leaders. That was a very nice honor also to be on that committee. Oh, this was just a letter of from the Student Association commending me for my service as a business administration assemblywoman. They said the mun then, it now says women, but now they said men. And for 45, 46. Okay, now I'm running again for re-election. This was in October 46. And so all the candidates were there, and here again are all the candidates for the assemblyman. And the business administration were always men, except for me. And I won again and was re-elected. And, oh, yes. See, this is it. College of Business Administration students, there were 7 of us who ran for that year, 6 guys and me, and I was re-elected. Norman Stoffman was from Tyler, and he was another Jewish boy who was running. And this was my advertising for passing out to everybody to re-elect me for this. This was the same year that Barefoot Sanders ran for president of the student body, and unfortunately he passed away recently, but we always kind of kidded one another over the years because I remember having to walk on, he had bare feet all over the sidewalks of the campus. That was his advertising. And I always chided him about that, even in recent years, about how we all had to walk on his feet. This was just more about that. In the Daily Texan in November of '46, and I was selected Girl of the Week. And it says, now starting her second term as Assemblywoman from the College of Business Administration, Jacque commands a prominent place in the university's political and student government scene, all this while holding several 40 acres beauty titles. Jacque is continuing her work of last year on the Assembly Finance Committee and has been appointed to the Health Committee. She is president of Delta Phi Epsilon, is an Orange Jacket, and is a member of Forensica, which was a speech society, and Beta Beta Alpha. This year they upped it. I guess the population was growing in the university, so this year they had 25 most beautiful girls, and I was one of those. This was my third year in this capacity, which was a very nice honor, and I think they finally, I think they left it at 25. I can't remember if they left it at 25 or then from the 25 they must have picked 10. And I was one of the 25, but did not get picked that year as one of the 10. Oh, this was very nice. This was an invitation to attend the inaugural reception tendered to the Honorable Buford Jester, Governor of Texas, and Honorable Alan Shivers, Lieutenant Governor of Texas, which was a nice honor to be invited to that. I guess from student government that we were invited. And then, I guess, final farewell to the university when I graduated was that I announced my engagement to Bernard Irving Bedeau from San Antonio, and this was in the Daily Texan paper announcing that.
There we go.
This is, in 1953, after we returned from Barney having been recalled during Korea, and we were stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina, we came home and decided to go into our own business. And we called it Bedeau Manufacturing Company, and the label was Jacque of Dallas. And this is when I changed from the Jackie that you saw in all the university paper, because my name is really Jacqueline, but I never used the Jacqueline because I always said I never grew tall enough to have such a long name. So Jacque was what I always used, and so, but this was a more fitting and elegant, I thought, spelling of Jacque to be put on the label than the common Jackie that everyone else used. And so we cut off the line again and we used the Jacque part. This was just our first factory building, which really wasn't much. But we got started in '53, and this was our letterhead. We made junior dresses and sportswear. This was a telegram, from two friends, Here's to Barney and Jack. My father called me Jack a lot because he wanted that boy, so he called me Jack more than he even called me Jackie. But this is, we were making the felt skirts and decorated skirts were big in that time, and that's what we were doing. And although we did skirts with stuff, it was mostly skirts and that type of thing, and separates. And of course, this was a time, this is 53, and look, we're back with all those scarves, which we continually wear. These are some of the ads from our, this was Barron's, which was a store, not in Dallas, Oklahoma City, this was. And these were some more of the kind of things we made. And here we were modeling. This was a show that we did at Amon Carter Field when it was first opened. And we did a fashion show there in the dining area. These are all of our garments modeled by. Here we had models. Most of the time, and a lot of the times, I did the modeling, and but not this time because I did the narration, and so this was Barney and I at that particular thing. We got a blue ribbon at the state fair for our garments. We did a lot of the felt skirts when felt skirts came in. Not only did we do a lot of skirts, but a lot of them lit up. We had them wired. This was a fashion show at the state fair. This is me modeling one of them. This was correct posture and how to achieve it will be the theme of B. Shaw's Charm School Monday on Channel 8 at 10 a.m. Seated, she demonstrated with aid of the apparel shop operator Adele Rabin, center, and designer Jacque Prager, how women of varying sizes can wear new fashions. So that was Adele Rabin, and the other one was me. Most of these are just different ads of different kinds of things we did. This was the fair. I think the fair was in Houston. This ad was in Sanger's. We sold all over, and this was an article that Barney put in, saluting our designer with lifetime contract. Mrs. Barney Bedeau, designer of famous Jackie. A little more than a year ago, the Jackie of Dallas line of fine sportswear, skirts, blouses, and separates made its debut in the Dallas fashion stage. Consumer acceptance was immediate, enthusiastic. Much credit for our line's rapid climb in popularity is due to our designer, Mrs. Barney Bedeau. Her knowledge of fashions and her flair for the unusual captured the imagination of buyers and translated them into smart sales, inviting creations. Our new fall line is no exception. Already it promises to top all records, so we salute Mrs. Bedeau for the job well done. The moral of the story, if your designer is tops, marry her. We did. And it's signed by Barney Bedeau. And this was another of our... And all of these are these are some of the things that lit up, like the lights lit up in that, and you can see that, and some of the jewels lit up in some of those, and this was in the window of one of the stores. I don't recall which one. These were all just different ads from different stores all over the state and the territory. These were the kind of things that we made. And we were very, very popular on the felt skirts. But we made outfits as well, you know, blouses to go with. This was Colbert's. This was in Women's Wear Daily, this one. So this was in the Fashion Sportswear magazine. That was, I guess, our ad. Same thing here. This is a very treasured item I have. We had a good friend who was an agent for famous people, and one of his people was Liberace. And whenever Lee would come to Dallas to perform, he would come to the factory, and he had a mother and a sister who he would buy clothes from, and he always came to buy from us. And so this is in one of the orders in 1955, and he ordered for them and signed it with love, and so I kind of treasure that. He was a very special man. This was in the gossip column of the Retailer. This was in 55, and this is gossip. And this was a picture, and it says, here on our right, in the white fluffy robe from the brand new October 39 line of Green Brothers, the model is guess who? The answer is at the end of the gossip column. Hats off to the Dallas fashion. Well, at the end of this, it says, the model in Green Brothers 1939 robe is Jackie Bedeau, now a manufacturer in her own right, together with her husband. Ed Green said she must have been all of 10 years old when this picture was made. As I had said before, I started modeling at 4 and just kept going. Just lots more picture ads. We got a blue ribbon at the State Fair again. And more EM can, that is. This was in the fall of the May market, the fall market. This was an EM can in April of 56.
Hold it. I turned it back on again.
Okay. Oh, this is me. I modeled in this particular time. I had very short hair then. And it looks like it's dark, but it was not. It was light, oddly enough. This is just pictures of, candid pictures around the mart. Excuse me. This was in our showroom that morning, showing the customers. These were other showrooms. Oh no, this one looks like me. This one is me. This one's me. This one's Barney, so we had 2 in this around the market. Okay. That's my Uncle George, so that must have been my dad's company right there. It was called L&L Manufacturing Company, and their label was Divine Garments, and that's my Uncle George showing their things. Again, just more of, now we're into holiday, and these were holiday dressy type things that we made. And here again, I'm modeling. This was, had something to do with the cotton. This was something to do with the Texas cotton industry. And so I modeled my own dress there. More styles. Got another blue ribbon at the state fair. Those were nice. This one was in '56. More ads. This was Colbert's. Ian Can was on the skirt over here. This was the era of big skirts. This was a party outfit. Very cute.